When William Saroyan's heartbeat faded on May 18, 1981, he still had millions of unpublished words among his papers, letters, notes, stories, even completely unpublished novels and plays. His passing led many to begin working on projects that used this remaining material, as well as republishing the vast bulk of work that had appeared during his lifetime for new collections. These works often showed portions of the life and work of William Saroyan in a new light available only once the master himself was no longer there to tell us what to think of them. These collections tend to be full of stories that devotees would have known and loved, mixed with lesser-known works added in to give a fuller picture. All of them include commentary on the man, his lifetime of writing, often from a personal point of view from those who knew him well. These works represent an important aspect of Saroyan's career, one in which he was absent as critic of the treatment of his own work, and in life he'd had notable battles with those editing his collections, but with a voice that still resonated. 1. Birth, 1983. Birth was written in 1979 at his apartment on 78 Rue Tabaut in Paris. His final book, published in his lifetime, Obituaries, reached American bookstores as he wrote these pieces in his French flat. Births is a series of ruminations written daily in a month between June 23rd and July 22nd. These pieces hold together as a single work, though each of them individually feel less like a part of a whole, but as a dawning thought. There are thoughts of a man in the twilight of his life reflecting back, with a definite nod towards birth, rebirth, and transformation. The book was published by Creative Arts Company of Berkeley, California. It was the first book of his work published after his death that featured unpublished words. It is the first book published with the copyright noted as the William Saroyan Foundation. The introduction was written by David Kurdian, who opens his introduction with this: Saroyan, the poet of childhood, is dead. He was my mentor, as I was for him in our own loose relationship, the only pupil he ever had. He talks about Saroyan not only as a legend, but of his timelessness. Kurdian believes Saroyan's writing was the writing of youth. It's a kind of preface/introduction that Saroyan himself might have written for one of his own collections. Creative Arts Book Company had published Obituaries as well. They would keep publishing through the 80s and 90s before folding in the 2010s. They would publish another Saroyan collection just a year later. My Name is Saroyan, 1983. Edited by James Tastian, Saroyan's friend and founding editor of the Armenian Review, this collection includes stories that first ran in Hernik Daily, Hernik Weekly, now the Armenian Weekly, and the Armenian Review. These were largely early works from Saroyan, including a few pieces that would be republished in later collections. While the poems and stories show Saroyan's evolution from young writers, including some written under the name Surak Goryan, to internationally beloved bestseller, they are greatly helped by the addition of a long preface by Tastian and a strong set of notes on the stories themselves. Tastian, who had been with these stories since they were written, provides an incredibly important sense of connection to the works. Many of these stories were being collected for the first time and represent an important documentation of these works that would only otherwise be available in printed periodicals that had become difficult to source by 1983. Also important is Tastian's commentary, which comes from a place of having worked with Saroyan both before and after he became a superstar in the literary field. The New Saroyan Reader, 1984. The subtitle of this massive trove of Saroyan writing is A Connoisseur's Anthology of the Writings of William Saroyan. It lives up to that billing. Featuring more than 50 stories and novel excerpts from across Saroyan's career, the book gives an excellent overview of not only the ways in which Saroyan grew as a writer, but how his eye towards the world and writing moved in new directions. The anthology is sometimes confused with the William Saroyan Reader from 1958, published by Georges Brasilier. And though there are some stories that are included in both, they are distinct volumes. It features some deep cuts, including 4 stories first published in the Armenian periodical Hernik, from his short story works, and from several chapters of his memoirs. Here comes There Goes You Know Who, Days of Life and Death and Escape to the Moon, Chance Meetings, and Obituaries. This was published by Creative Arts Book Company and edited by Brian Derwent, who wrote a biographical sketch of Saroyan based largely on the author's own writing. Derwent would return to Saroyan a decade later, though this was Creative Arts' last Saroyan work published. The Pheasant Hunter, 1986. One of the more innovative publishers of the 1980s was Red Path Press. While they published traditional books, they also sold a line of short stories as greeting cards called Perfect Presents. These were sold in bookstores, often in spinner racks as impulse buys at the register. They were also purchased by hotels and cruise lines as gift to leave on the pillows of guests instead of the traditional mint. These small titles, short stories, were printed small, only 7.5 by 4 inches. Redpath included stories by the likes of Woody Allen, Kurt Vonnegut, John Cheever, and A. Milne. Saroyan's entry, The Pheasant Hunter, originally appeared in the collection The Assyrian in 1950. This handsome, slim work was designed by Rita Marshall with beautiful bird illustrations by Etienne Delessert. While the story is considered one of Saroyan's finest, it had only been reprinted once after its initial appearance in The Assyrian in an issue of World Review, a UK-based magazine. Madness in the Family, 1988. Edited by Leo Hamelian, the former editor of Ararat magazine who had published Saroyan for a number of years. This was the first new collection of Saroyan's magazine work since the Haut Voyage in 1956, though a reprint collection, My Kind of Crazy Wonderful People, was published by Harcourt Brace for a classroom audience in 1968. The collection focuses on stories released in the 1970s in magazines such as The Atlantic, The New Yorker, and the Ladies' Home Journal, as well as Harper's. It is a tight collection with a brief editor's note, republished introduction from Saroyan's Places Where I've Done Time, and a letter from William Saroyan to James Laughlin, founder of New Direction Books. The rest of the collection is 17 stories from an era where Saroyan was publishing works widely, but was no longer the driving literary force he had been 30 years prior. Still, some pieces like Gaston and The Last Word Was Love are among Saroyan's most fascinating and well-honed. This was not New Direction's first foray into the Saroyan business, nor their last. Saroyan had appeared in New Directions in 1937, an anthology that included other authors including William Carlos Williams, John Cocteau, and E. E. Cummings. The Man with the Heart in the Highlands and Other Stories, 1989. This collection of 16 stories all come from a period between 1936 and 1944. It is an excellent document of Saroyan during his superstar era. The title story, one of Saroyan's most important, as it was the basis for his first play and one of his most reprinted works, actually first appeared in 3x3 from Conference Press, a publisher which Saroyan himself had helped found. The other stories included all seem to show Saroyan's early prose power, perhaps none so well as the classic piece, The Mother. The introduction to the book was written by Herb Caen, longtime friend of Saroyan's and famed San Francisco newspaper columnist. The intro reflects on Saroyan as San Francisco legend and bon vivant more than as a writer. Saroyan Memoirs, 1994. Brian Darwent again edits Saroyan pieces, though this time non-fiction. He collected stories from various periods of Saroyan's writings that deal with his interactions with individuals ranging from Marilyn Monroe to composer Jean Sibelius. These are more personal stories, and they all come from book sources, mostly from later in Saroyan's career when he had turned largely to autobiography and memoir. Some are portions of chapters of books, including Chance Meetings, Sons Come and Go, Mothers Hang In Forever, Places Where I've Done Time, and Not Dying. Darwin's introduction sets them all into the context of a Saroyan that had known everyone and had views on everything under the sun. While the focus on individuals is fascinating, some of the chapters are clipped from their original purposes. This makes them somewhat standalone, though often lacking larger context. Where the Bones Go, 2002. This is described as Saroyan's last memoir, having started in January 1980 and been completed less than 5 months later, roughly a year before his passing on May 18, 1981. The work is slightly disjointed, a series of short pieces on topics that seem to reflect on his own need to tell the world everything before his then inevitable passing. The piece is actually a small section from an overall manuscript that runs more than 300,000 words. It was edited by Robert Zatrakian, then head of the William Saroyan Foundation, and was published by the press at California State University, Fresno. It is an interesting look at Saroyan's tendency to create dates as a primary consideration. While some reviewed the work as feeling somewhat disjointed, perhaps because of the fact it is a small portion of a much larger manuscript, it shows what Saroyan was working towards at the end of his life. Essential Saroyan, 2005. Editor William E. Justice compiled a taut collection of stories that represent many of Saroyan's absolute classics, including The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze, 7,000 Assyrians, 5 Ripe Pears, and The Summer of the Beautiful White Horse. Also included are excerpts of books including The Human Comedy, The Adventures of Wesley Jackson, and The Bicycle Rider of Beverly Hills. The focus on books is one that Saroyan himself would have appreciated, as he was often looking for ways to get his books included in his anthologies, notably the Saroyan Special and the William Saroyan Reader. And here they do quite a bit of work illuminating that portion of his career, from the outbreak of World War II through the early 1950s. This is certainly a piece that gives a strong overview of what Saroyan was writing at several points in his life. While no collection could possibly cover his entire oeuvre in a single, liftable volume, this work certainly gives us a strong introduction. Young Saroyan, Follow and Other Early Writings, 2008. Published as a part of Saroyan's 100th birthday commemoration, this is mostly a book-shaped publication of his 1928 novella Follow, which was published serially in the Fresno Bee the same year. This book is an interesting look at that work, as it provides a strong background and provides portions of letters to Saroyan's uncle, Uncle Miron, often spelled Miron with an I instead of an E, that deal with his time in New York, as well as several pieces that document Saroyan's time and view of that city. The book was edited by William B. Seacrest, librarian for Fresno County Library, and published by the press at California State University at Fresno. The book includes an introduction by Dikran Kamujian, Saroyan's friend and the man who cleared out the Legends apartment after his death. He Flies Through the Air with the Greatest of Ease, 2008. Another massive tome covering a large portion of Saroyan's career, it combines short stories with novels and plays. Highlighting stories from The Daring Young Man on the Flying Trapeze and other stories, Inhale and Exhale, The Trouble with Tigers, and The Whole Voyald, along with novels My Name is Aram and Tracy's Tiger, as well as his beloved play, The Time of Your Life. It also includes several pieces from both Obituaries, the final book published in his lifetime, and its intended sequel, More Obituaries, a complete manuscript of which exists in Saroyan's papers at Stanford's Green Library. The foreword was written by Herb Gold, a compatriot of Saroyan's from the 1960s onwards, and a fine writer often associated with the Beat generation, though he considered himself more Beat-adjacent than an actual member of that tribe. His look at Saroyan is more of a personal set of memories of his friend, while editor William Justice provides a more traditional preface to Saroyan's work themselves. These works all show not only Saroyan's genius and legendary output, but the variety of his visions and ability to work in different forms, while still maintaining a sense of singular purpose. His works are presenting us with an idea of a new optimism that would have been largely lost due to the Great Depression, at first, and later World War II and Vietnam. These volumes demonstrate what Saroyan-esque writing is in a way that makes it clear the impact the world had on his writing, and perhaps even more so, the impact his writing had on the world. Thank you for listening to From the Collection of Forever Saroyan. I'm Chris Garcia. See you next time.